Welcome to Talmudic Treasures. Today we're learning Ketubot page 14, which discusses an interesting conversation regarding accusations. That if you have a situation where a person is possibly a cholol is someone who became profane because his mother, who was divorced, was not allowed to marry Kohen. She did anyway and ended up having this child. So that child will be a cholol. It is possible a situation where it's a suffix, it's a doubt. We don't know, is this mother in fact producing a cholol? Because let's say she received a divorce document, but we were unsure if necessarily it was a valid one, and then subsequently her husband died. So if she was a widow, she's allowed to marry Kohen, and therefore the child will not be a cholol. Now this child is being accused. The question is, does that child or this person now need to be silent, or do they need to speak up? And the same goes when it comes to a much stronger accusation, namely being called a Mamzer, which is a product usually of adultery. And that is a much more serious accusation because they cannot even enter in regard to marriage into Kahal Hashem. They cannot marry into a regular relationship. And if they're quiet or screaming, what does that mean? So the Talmud says that it really depends on how you look at it, because the person who is accused of being a cholol could say to himself, I don't need to say anything because it doesn't really matter, because I may decide to be silent and I'll still be able to marry basically whomever I wish. I can marry into Kahal Hashem. And therefore, because of that, it's not really such a problem for me. And the fact that they're silent, silence does not necessarily prove that he knows that, in fact, there's something wrong with him genetically. There's something in his DNA that he's a cholol. Not necessarily a proof. However, it comes to a mamzer, if you're silent, that already may show that there's something going on. And therefore, you should speak up. Alternatively, you can look at it in a different way. You could say, well, when it comes to a mamzer, that is such a huge accusation that people are going to know whether or not it's actually true. And the fact is that if someone accuses you or says something so outlandish and ridiculous and says that you come from as a mamzer relationship, it's possible you could be silent because you know that if it was in fact true, everyone would have known it as a fact. The fact that this person is accusing you of it doesn't really mean anything, and therefore your silence doesn't prove anything. On the other hand, a cholol, because it's not such a well-known thing, a person's silence maybe could be the other way around. So it's very fascinating that we could derive from this logic of whether you should speak up when you're accused of something, or there's really no point, you should just be silent. And perhaps it depends on the severity of what the accusation is. If it's something in which is so ridiculous and outlandish that no one would even believe it, it's almost not even worthwhile to entertain that conversation. By you doing so, it almost shows an element of guilt. And therefore, when someone says something ridiculous about you, sometimes the best thing a person can do is walk away. However, otherwise, if a person says something which could be potentially interpreted to be true, then we have to be careful to speak up to make sure that our reputation is not tarnished.